What's up, guys, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Robbie Cassidy and I'm your host today, and today we're going to discuss why injuries reoccur. So why, when you have one injury, are you at risk of having the same injury again? Okay, and this is very common with knee injuries, with muscle injuries, so let's say hamstring or quad or calf, and it's also very common, let's say ankle injuries as well is another huge one that you see. People get recurrent ankle injuries all the time. And you could look at shoulder as well, upper body, you'll have those a lot as well. So I'm going to go into a bit of detail on these today, explore different ideas of what happens to the body and why that would cause you to be at risk of injury again. And obviously, depending on your situation, depending on what you do after that injury is going to have a huge impact on it. So I'm going to go into a bit of detail on that as I go through the podcast. But before I jump into that, I want to talk a small bit about my tolerance programs that are out at the moment. So my hamstring tolerance program is on my website at the moment, and it's basically a mix of strength, mobility, and plyometric exercise. And the goal of the program is to reduce risk of hamstring injury. It can be used in season or in the preseason. So if you struggle with hamstring tightness or if you've had hamstring injuries in the past, this is definitely a go-to for you. So if you find that now that you're sprinting, whenever you pick up a bit of speed, that the hamstring starts to tighten up, that you could be lacking a bit of strength there, a bit of stability around that area, and that could be causing, or could be putting you at risk of a hamstring injury later in the season. So the program itself talks about, it goes through everything. It has all your 3 workouts that you want to fit in every week, and you can do those after a session. So I actually promote doing them after your pitch session, because that way then you're getting a full day recovery the next day, or mixing it in with your gym session as well. So whichever works best for yourself. And I talk about that in the program, how to actually use it to the best, so you get the best out of it. And then in the program also I discuss load management, because that's one of the main components when it comes to preventing injuries, is that load. If you have too many trainings, you're going to be at a higher risk of injury. Okay, so that's another huge component of it as well. So check that out. It's on my website. You can go straight into the link in my bio at Mobility Tutor on Instagram, and you'll see it's right at the top of the list. Okay, so jumping straight into the podcast and without further ado, basically what we're going to talk about today, a few of the topics we're going to cover are why do injuries reoccur themselves? Like, what is causing that to happen? And I'm going to talk through a few different things. Then on top of that, I'm going to talk about common mistakes people make when they're rehabbing an injury. And then at the end, I'm just going to talk a small bit on what you can do yourself to reduce the risk of injury or reduce the risk of a recurring injury. But hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a good understanding of what causes injuries to recur. And that way, if you need to, you can take care of it yourself, or if you need to shoot me a message on Instagram, or if you want to get in contact, we can discuss it further then to what's the best plan or what way you can go about it. So jumping into it, why do injuries reoccur? So when you get an injury first, let's just look at an ankle injury, for example. When you have an ankle injury, basically what happens is this leaves an imprint on your nervous system. And I use the word imprint because it's a part, your nervous system becomes more sensitive to that area because the body knows that it has been injured there before. And it wants to avoid getting injured there again. So looking at the knee, looking at the ankle, a really, really easy example of what you'll see is that someone who has had a knee injury before, their knee will start kicking up when they start running, when they get fatigued. And that's because they're highly sensitized to that area. So if you've had a knee surgery before, you start running, you get back out on the pitch, you'll find a lot of the time that your knee will kick up early on in the season when you're not used to running. And that's because you're sensitized to that area because of that imprint that was left on it initially. Now, a higher sensitivity is going to cause a good bit more pain, but there's a lot more things that contribute to that, and I discussed that in the podcast, so I won't go into massive detail on what pain is. Now, if you're interested in that, definitely go back on number 2 or number 3. I did the pain experience, and I go into a lot of detail on what causes pain, and it's definitely one of the podcasts that I refer back to most in the series of podcasts that I've done, because it goes into so much detail on what causes pain, what contributes to it, what can you do about it. So when you think about that imprint that's been left on the system, now the body recognizes the injured area, and it recognizes that around that area it's lacking strength, or it's lacking stability, or it's lacking something, and that's why it got injured in the first place. So what it has to do, because the body and the nervous system is always trying to protect you, it's always trying to keep you safe, it'll reorganize your body mechanics so you will reduce the load in the area. And this is initially after, but this, if you don't rehab it properly, this reorganization can stay around a long time. And an easy example is someone who tears an ACL. you'll know straight away when you put them into a squat position, a lot of the time they'll shift over to one side. Now, this can happen on if you've an ACL torn or not, but it's very apparent in someone who's torn ACL is that they'll shift over onto their good side. They'll put a lot of weight. So a lot of the time when you're rehabbing ACLs, you're actually trying to train that person to put more weight through the injured side, and you're trying to train the body to get comfortable with using that injured side again. Because if you let it go on over time, your body will completely shift over to one side. It'll, as I was saying, it'll reorganize your mechanics, so it won't load that area as much. And the reason it's not loading that area is because it's not comfortable. It doesn't feel like it's strong, and with that, then you're obviously at higher risk of injury if you do ever in future load that area, like with a jump unconsciously. If you don't mean to and you land on it, you're obviously at an increased risk because it's going to be weaker. It won't be able to stabilize as well. So as I said, it's going to avoid loading an area, and loading, I mean like if you're landing from a jump and you're putting weight through it, or if you're running, it's going to avoid loading that area if it feels uncomfortable. Okay, and if it also feels uncomfortable, I talk about that in that pain podcast. But another reason that you get pain in certain positions is because the body's feeling uncomfortable and it wants to avoid that position. So it's going to give you pain, so you stay away from that position. Another way it does it is that it'll lock up muscles, get tight around an area, they'll squeeze, they won't let you into position, you'll be lacking mobility there as well. Now, if you think about that, so why do they reoccur? We're looking at that knee, we're looking at that ankle, so you've injured that. Let's just use the knee. It's probably a bit more of it's an easier example to use. So now you have hurt the knee once, you've done all your training, you went through a bit of rehab, you probably didn't follow through on your prehab as much or all the way to the end of it because you wanted to get back in the season. You get out training, and the first day you're okay, everything's all right, you're training away. Second day then, small bit, you're probably getting a bit of pain, kicking up through that knee. And then as you go through the season, if you don't take time to recover properly and the body starts to get fatigued, you'll notice the pain will kick up a small bit more. And then because of the fact that it's lacking strength there, it's lacking coordination around the area, you're at a higher risk of injury or of injuring that knee again. Okay, now when you injure it initially, there's obviously a lot of events that happen around the area, but as I said, if you're offloading that and you're loading the opposite side then, and you're not, and your body's feeling uncomfortable, over time then you're going to lose strength there. The same as if you don't use it, you lose it. It's just a simple principle that works with the body. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. Okay, so by not using that and by offloading all the time, strength deficits will occur. When you're fatigued, then you're at higher risk of injury. If you do load it or unconsciously, you're not planning to load it. Okay, so let's say you're playing a game, you catch a ball, you come down to the fella in front of you, so your lady in front of you, and you have to get out of the way. So you step one and you come onto your knee that was previously injured. And because you're already fatigued and because the body's not aware of that position as much and it hasn't been using it as much, you can see how it could cause an injury there. Now, on top of that, when you have injured, let's say a knee or a joint specifically, if you have injured one of those places, then you have these what they call proprioceptive deficits. And proprioception is your body's awareness in space. So, and I've discussed this in a few different podcasts. But you have these proprioceptors around the area. So once you injure the area, those proprioceptors become affected. You're not as aware of that joint. And then if you're not as aware of that joint, your body doesn't know how to organize it as well in different positions or when you're going through movements. Okay, because these proprioceptors have been affected and they're not sending the same signals back to your brain and your nervous system as they would have been, or if they are on the good side. And that's because this happens a lot of the time with people who go through a rehab program but don't do that return to sport stuff. So they get to a certain level, but the really, really high level tasks that are actually required in a game, so like as I was saying, cutting, jumping, landing, all those tasks and avoiding people, they need a lot of coordination and a lot of feedback from your body to know where you are, to know what's going on. So if it doesn't have that feedback, or if it's getting the wrong feedback, well then you're going to be at an increased risk of injury because the joint position might be off, I suppose is the easiest way to say it. It doesn't organize yourself well enough to be able to tolerate the positions that you put yourself through. And that's because of those proprioceptive feedback, I suppose, isn't as good as it should be. Okay, and this is really, really common with ankle injuries. People if you've injured your ankle once, you're at risk of re-injuring it again because of the fact that these proprioceptors have been affected. Now, obviously, there's strength deficits there as well. But when you think about it, your body awareness isn't as good in that position because the proprioceptors are damaged, and then when you land, you don't have as much awareness of where your foot is when you're landing, or when you're running, or when you're stopping or starting, and then you'll roll your ankle again. And if you keep doing it, you can see how, like, once you do your ankle a few times, it happens very, very easily after that. Now, there is the other side of the thing, in that you're lacking the strength in the ligaments as well, and the tendons around the ankle, and the joint itself isn't as strong because it's been injured before. But those proprioceptors play a massive role in it as well, in why it would get injured again. So there are a couple of simple ones that I wanted to talk about. Now, and coordination is another one as well. So your muscles have to coordinate to control joints. It's not that just there's one muscle's on, one muscle's off. It's not that one muscle controls everything all the time. Nearly always, if one's working concentrically, the other one's working eccentrically to control it. Concentrically is when a muscle is shortening. So if you're doing a bicep curl, it's when you bring the weight from the bottom up to the top. Eccentrically is when it's lengthening and it's controlling it. And that's when you're letting that weight down from the top all the way back down again. And the fact that it doesn't just slam down, and that's why they say to go slow up and down when you're training, is because you're training the eccentric control of that muscle. And it's really, really important to train that as well. So if you're not doing that, basically what I'm saying is that the coordination part of that, it needs to coordinate muscles so they work together, they co-contract together so the joint is stable. Really easy example is the knee and the calf have to co-contract when you're running to help stabilize, the hamstring and the calf need to co-contract together to help stabilize the knee when you're running. There's a really, really easy example of it. But if they aren't coordinating well, because you haven't trained and you haven't done these high level tasks in your training, then you're going to be at more of a risk because they're going to be slightly off. And you'll see it a lot of the time if the muscle isn't coordinating well, and you put them through an isometric exercise, that the muscle will actually shake and shiver and it look like it's going into cramp. And that's because it's kind of figuring out again what it needs to do and when it needs to do it. So that's a really common one that you'll see as well all the time. And then other things you can do, I should touch on before I move off of strength deficits. In general, once you've injured an area, it gets deconditioned if you don't rehab it properly. Even if you do rehab it properly, there's always going to be that small bit of a difference between your good side and your bad side. But the thing is, it's important to rehab both of them because you get this crossover as well. So by doing bicep curls on your right arm, you do actually get a small bit of a crossover onto your left arm just from doing it. So it's important to train both sides with high level tasks, because when it comes down to it, that's represented on your brain, in your motor cortex, what you could say. Your motor cortex maps out all the different parts of your body, and it coordinates it with your cerebellum, coordinates it with your somatosensory and your occipital lobe, and all that, everything together comes to so you can move. And if you injure an area, that, because it hasn't been used, especially with something that doesn't get used for a couple of months after, let's just a really quick example, somebody who is an amputee, if their arm is removed from the elbow, if they're missing a finger, or their hand is removed, the part of the brain that controls that will get taken over by other. It'll be used for another function, because once it figures out that it's not being used for anything anymore, as the principle applies, if you don't use it, you lose it. The brain doesn't waste space, and it's going to pick up on other things. And they've actually found that people who are at risk of ACL injury, they did one study that they scanned them at the start of the season, and then they scanned them at the end of the season. It was women or lady soccer players, and the ones that tore their ACL were the ones who had the least connectivity to the cerebellum, which is the coordination part of their brain. So that's because it was less represented on their brain. They were at higher risk of injury, is what the conclusion was, or what the research suggested. Now, as I said, if you don't use it, you lose it. So the same applies. Even obviously there are more severe examples. Amputee is obviously a very severe example, but it applies. It's across the board. The same principle applies across the board. When it's been injured for a while and it hasn't been used for a while, then it's going to, the part of the brain that it's represented on will, I don't want to say shrink, because the brain doesn't shrink, but it will get taken over by other parts, or its connectivity won't be as strong around that area. So that's why it's important to do these high level tasks to get you back to the same level as what you were at before. Now, on top of that, you have these, or if you have mobility deficits in the area as well, so let's say if you injure your hip, Shoulders is actually the easiest example for this. Someone who's dislocated their shoulder will not want to go into positions like external rotation or even abduction and extension. They won't want to go into those positions because their body remembers that that's the position that they were in when they got injured initially. So it avoids those positions, and how it avoids is if you go back into that position, you'll get pain and it'll stop you going into that position, or the body will get really tight, the muscles will get tight, and it'll protect the area so it won't let you into that position at all. So now you have a mobility deficit around that area because it was a previous injury there in the first place. So that's another one as well that plays into it. And they're really, 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 really common when someone injures an area, especially a joint. Nearly always they're going to lose range of motion as a protective mechanism because the body doesn't want to get injured there again, so it won't let it into the position that possibly injured it in the first place. Really important to remember that. And nearly all of my clients with long-term injuries have some type of mobility deficit. I would say all of them have a mobility deficit if they've injured a joint, or even if they've had surgery on a joint, or something like, let's say they've had a labral injury or they had relocation surgery, something like that. Nearly always have a mobility deficit, and it's due to the fact that the body is protecting that area. So you're trying to work it back in there. Now, if you're lacking range in certain positions, let's say if go back to the knee, if you're ACL, if you can't lock out your leg fully, then you're obviously going to be at risk of another injury because the body can't transfer force through that joint as efficiently and as effectively as it used to. So it's going to, if it can't do that, the force has to come out somewhere. So it might come out the side of the knee, it might come out the back of the knee, it might come out the front of the knee, or it could translate down to the ankle, or it could even translate up to the hip. So it is important to get that range back when you do injure a joint, and you want to have them both sides very similar enough. You will have small differences, but you want to have them fairly similar, within 10% of each other, I would say. So that's another one really, really important thing to look at when you are looking at why they reoccur. Now, muscles are going to be a small bit different because they have scar tissue build-up. So if you don't rehab it properly, you'll get a good lump of scar tissue there, and then because of that, you will injure, or you'll be at a higher risk of strain again. And I know this myself because I had a grade 2 I wouldn't say grade 3, but it was a grade 2, fairly severe grade 2 tear of my quad, and I have a nice lump in my quad now where I have no feeling in it, and it's a nice look. You can see it. It's a visible hole where I did tear it, and I know if I go out playing football and if I pick a ball up and try kick it while being cold, straight away it's going to tear. I know that. I know not that it's going to tear, but it's going to get a strain in it. I have to warm up before I do it. So if I go out, pick a ball up, try kick it, I just know that quad is going to get a twinge basically. And it's because I have a nice lump of scar tissue built up there, because when I injured it initially, I went back too early, injured it again. So this is why I push about don't go back too early so much. Went back too early, injured it again, and was missed a good few months after that. And as a result, big hole, lot of scar tissue, and unless I warm up, I'm at risk of injuring it or straining it again. So really, really, really important to follow through with your rehab all the time. And when it comes to muscle injury, you are looking to build strength, and you're looking to build strength through full range of motion, not just small, or not just very specific ranges. You need to find the points you're weak at. You need to build on them all the time. And I really, really emphasize that with all my clients, that we actually have to build on these areas. We have to build on areas that you injured before, because if you don't, you're going to be at a high risk of re-injuring it again. Okay, so there are a few of them now. That's not like, there's obviously a lot more things that play into it as well. And actually, one that I was talking about there, that fear avoidance about when you're trying to, like, when you're bringing your arm out into position and it's trying to lock out. That's one of the most common ones you'll see of why people have pain in a joint, is that it's like a fear avoidance thing. It's consciously or subconsciously they're avoiding to get into that position, and because they know there should be, or because they know they're injured there before, that pain just shoots up so quick. So it can be awkward working. So at the start with if you had that kind of how would you say, response to a movement, it can be difficult at the start to get to know that it actually, you aren't injuring it anymore. It's just your body is protecting you there when you try to go into that position. So that's one of the main things, and that's why with my clients, it's completely, I would say it's more education than training. So we obviously have your training, your program and that, but it's educating every week, discussing it. Why do you think that happened? What caused that? Is that because of this or the other? And what caused the pain? Why was it so high? And are you afraid of that pain, or is it hurt? Like, because it was hurting you, does that mean you've injured it again? And we go into a lot of detail on that. So education is a huge part of that and a huge component of that, because if you don't educate them, basically when they go into that position, pain kicks up, they'll just say, fuck that, Robbie, I'm not going into that position again. I didn't want to do that and that was hurting me. And that's why we need to break it down a small bit when we talk about pain and talk about what it is and what causes it and all, and how to go about it next time. So that's another. Now that leads me on to my next time. Common mistakes made by people when rehabbing an injury, and that's one of the main ones. Is actually they're avoiding certain positions because they know it's going to give them pain, and instead of trying to actually work on that, what they do instead is they just stay away from it. Other issues that I often see with people rehabbing injury, or people who come to me with an injury that they're a reoccurring injury, one that they've had before and it keeps kicking up again, is that they don't finish out their initial rehab properly. And I am the number one culprit for this. That's why I was talking about my leg, is that go to a certain point, you feel great, you feel like you're back to where you were, and then you stop training, or then you stop your rehab and you just jump back into training. So you don't have any return to sport protocol at all. You're just training, you're just doing your rehab, and a lot of the time the rehab is just in the gym, and then I moved from the gym straight on the pitch. And a lot of guys do that, and a lot of girls do that as well. It's not singling it out guys here. A lot of people do that in general, is that they just move straight from the physio table out to the pitch, and then straight away after 2 weeks they get the same injury again. They're wondering what happened to them. So that's another one that you really need to look at. Finish out your rehab. If you're with a physio, really focus on actually making sure that return to play stuff. And if you have any questions on return to play stuff, get on to me as well on Instagram and we can talk about it. It is really important to actually bridge that gap, and it's not moving straight from the gym onto the pitch. Another thing is, a lot of people only cover the strength part of it. So once they feel they're strong enough, then they get back to it. So they skip out on the mobility stuff, they skip out on the plyometric stuff, they skip out on the actual return to play running stuff as well. And because of that, then when the low comes on, when it puts them in a situation that they feel like when they're in a situation that they have to like use those movements, so let's say jump or run or land or any of those, they get injured again because they had never covered it initially. So the return to sport is probably the biggest issue that I see with people who are rehabbing an injury, that they're not actually completing those high level tasks to reduce those proprioceptive deficits, reduce those the fear avoidance behaviors, to making sure that they have enough mobility and enough strength in the area, and that they're actually able to work in the movements and actually able to do the movements that their body needs to do in a game situation. So they're missing out on those different components, and it's not as comprehensive as they should be. That's a huge one as well. So, and then the other mistake is not continuing with your prehab after you've done your rehab. So you've returned to play now and you're feeling strong and you're feeling good. So you stop doing all the prehab stuff, and then it comes to the off season and then you completely stop doing the prehab stuff. So you don't do anything at all till it comes to next February again, and you have to get back out on the pitch, and then hamstring goes again. You're out for the first 4 to 6 weeks. You get back, you follow your thing. You still have to catch up to the fitness of the team, so it takes you another 6 weeks to get there. So 12 weeks spent trying to get back to where you were, and then depending on if you followed through with your program properly, or if you're doing your rehab, a lot of the time I see guys who aren't following through with it properly injuring a hamstring again. 6 weeks, 12 weeks. So you've just spent 6 months of the year trying to get yourself right, and it comes to the championship stage, and then you're wondering why, let's say you're sitting on the sideline or you're not at full fitness, and it's because just not following through and not continuing with prehab. And prehab is really important when you get back to play. Now, lastly, I want to touch on a small bit how you can reduce your risk, and we've talked about this a bit as I've gone through it, so I won't dwell on it too long. But basically, what you want to do is you want to take a holistic approach to the rehab that you're doing. So, firstly, I would definitely recommend, if you want to reduce your risk, is to work with a professional who specializes in like sports, or in sport and exercise, or in the activity you're doing, or has a good knowledge and a good base of what you should be doing when you're returning to sport. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself, and so common, I've seen guys have a hamstring tear, get dry needling for 6 weeks while they're waiting for it to tear, doing a couple of handy hamstring exercises, then going back in and wondering why then they tear their hamstring 3 times a year. Like so like genuinely so common. I probably could pick 3 players on our own team that I know that do that, and we've a very small club. So, and it's generally the older guys that get caught up in that as opposed to younger lads. But the thing is, if you're with, let's say, a physio or physical therapist or athletic therapist who's been doing that for years, and they've just been using dry needle and it's their go-to, then I don't know, it's hard to blame them in a way because it's what they've been doing. Old habits die hard and all that crack. But yeah, it doesn't transfer to sport. So you should be working with a professional who specializes in return to sport stuff, or who specializes in return to what you want to do. So that's why the guys that come to me, we really focus on what are your end goal here. Like if you're a power lifter, like working with a power lifter at the moment who hasn't deadlifted in 3 years or 2 years because they injured their back and then they stopped their sport and then they went back and then injured it again, stopped again and just left it out altogether. And it's because when they finished up, they maybe some of the treatments that they were told to do wasn't the most effective treatment, and once they went back to lifting heavy weights again, obviously they were at risk again, so it didn't translate over to their sport at all. But that's beside the point. Basically what I'm saying is, if you're going to be doing that stuff, you need to work with a professional. Don't just take it upon yourself to figure it all out. I'm giving you information here that you can take away and kind of jig around and jump and do your own bits with. But when it comes to that type of stuff, it is important to actually work with a professional who knows what they're doing. Now, other ways you can reduce your risk is work on prehab in season when you're playing and in the off season, both of them. So in season, you're trying to mix your prehab, and I've podcasted on this. You're trying to mix your rehab in with your sessions that you're doing on the pitch or with your gym sessions, and then you're actually trying to plan your rehab, or you're trying to plan your recovery sessions a bit more. In the off season, then it's a bit more general. You can kind of work on everything. You're working on your relative strength, and you're working on getting the body into as best condition as you can before you get back onto the pitch, but you're also working on the exercises that you're going to be doing on the pitch. And with that, you're going to reduce your risk because it's high level tasks. The body gets better at doing them, and nervous system gets better at coordinating them. And because of that, then you're obviously not as much of a risk. And then your fatigue levels don't kick up as much because you're recovering faster as well. So that's another one. When you have a good preseason put down, you recover a lot faster in season. And then on top of that, I would say become aware of your body and the deficits that are there. So if there's certain exercises in the gym that you favor, the opposite of those exercises is usually going to be where some deficits are. So I know a lot of lads love chest, like they love doing chest exercises, and a lot of ladies love doing legs and arse. They love doing that. So if you're doing chest a lot of the time and you're missing out on your back, let's say, or you're missing out on your legs, because really that's what happens is you do chest and then you don't do legs because the two of them are just, I don't know why, but people do that so often. But if you're doing that, you're obviously going to be at more of a risk of a lower limb injury because you're so top heavy. All right. And the same thing is with ladies. If you're doing lower limb stuff all the time, you're at risk of a upper limb injury, or you're at risk of even, like, let's say, a quad injury or hamstring injury because you're just training arse all the time, or a calf injury or an ankle injury. So it's important to hit everything, to take a holistic approach and become aware of where your deficits are. Being aware of what you enjoy training. Like for me, I really enjoy training legs, and I really enjoy training back. So chest is probably my downfall in terms of, like, I don't train it enough. I probably should train it. When I was boxing for years, so I was always training out in front of me. I always kind of had felt that I was strong in those positions, so I kind of neglected them a small bit since. So now it's probably something that I should pick up on a small bit more. And I know that, like, even my shoulders definitely could do with a bit more work as well. So, and I'm not talking specifically hypertrophy here, I'm talking about performance stuff as opposed to just getting bigger. But yeah, so become aware of your body, know where your deficits are, and build on them. That's going to be the most important thing in season and off season. And then load management is very, very, very important, and I'm always driving it. Take a holistic approach. Look at your week, look at the way you're training, look at your month. Are you training 6 days a week for 3 or 4 weeks in a row? Because if you are, it's going to break down somewhere. You need to be planning recovery sessions somewhere. I always say you need to be getting 2 recovery sessions, full recovery days in season. And that's why I say you can't be always trying to do prehab on your off days, because prehab is very specific strengthening. So it's very specific fatigue in a way, or stress to a very specific area. And if you're doing that at the wrong time and you're not giving yourself a chance to recover, you're actually increasing your risk more so than reducing it. So load management is huge. Make sure you're managing your load properly. If you have to take days off, do, and make sure you're recovering as best you can when you need to. So guys, that's everything I wanted to discuss today and talk about. So hopefully that provided some value. Hopefully you have a better idea of why injuries reoccur. When you've injured an area, there's obviously deficits that are going to be there, and it's not just strength. There's proprioceptive deficits. There's higher level deficits, like as I was saying, in your brain that become affected as well, so that you're not able to coordinate it as well. It's not as well represented. So we need to work on those, and you need to improve those. If you don't improve those, then you are starting, if you just improve strength and you don't improve the other neurological side of things, then you're going to be putting yourself at risk when you get back into the game. And it's really important to do that. And then on top of that, follow through with your prehab programs, follow through with your rehab programs, and just be consistent. If you're consistent with those in your recovery, you might get niggles here and there, but in general, you're going to be fairly good. You're going to be okay. But so hopefully, guys, that helped you today, and hopefully you can take something from that. If you have any questions, make sure to send them on to me on Instagram at Mobility Tutor or LinkedIn, or send me an email at mobilitytutor@gmail.com. As I said already, if you're looking for a prehab program, I have that hamstring prehab program. I have a knee and ankle, and I have a shoulder one coming out. Also, the hamstring one is out right now. So check that out. It's on my website, or you can just go to the link in my bio and you'll see it straight away. Other than that, if you're listening to this on iTunes, I would love if you could leave a comment. Let me know what you think. It goes a long way, it really does, in pushing it up the ratings, and then leaving a rating on it as well. If you wouldn't mind doing that, it would be a massive help. And then outside of that, the other way you could help out would just be send this podcast to a friend, someone who you think would be interested in it, who has an interest in training, who has an interest in injury prevention, who has an interest in just performing at their best all the time, and like mobility stuff as well, I suppose. I should throw that in there. But yeah, just send it on to them. That'd be excellent. Or share it on your story. That's the other one. I would love if you could do that as well, because it goes a long way in promoting the podcast. But yeah, so guys, hopefully you took something from that. If anyone has any questions, get on to me. If you're looking for coaching as well, you can get on to me. I'll be taking on more clients over the next couple of weeks. But that's everything from me today. So thanks a million for listening. Hope everyone is doing well and training well and getting back into it. And I will chat to you all again soon. Have a good one.